Are you struggling with students who reach out for the phones instead of paying attention to the lessons? Are you trying to make your lessons more relevant and meaningful to your students? I'm Rubens Heredia, one of Pavilion ELT vloggers, and in this video I'm going to try to help you make your lessons more engaging. How? By bringing the real world into the classroom. So come with me. But what is the real world anyway? Philosophers like Plato and Descartes have played with the idea that everything we perceive around us is actually an illusion. You might be familiar with those ideas from the movie The Matrix. But unless you're really into philosophy or you've taken the red pill, I'm sure we can agree that the world around us is pretty much real. And so are the needs of our learners. Our students need English to communicate in the real world. They might want to interact with people at work or study abroad. They might want to travel and use English as a means to communicate in different countries. They might even want to study English in order to follow their favorite TV series. In the globalized world we live in today, English is everywhere. I read a very interesting article in the latest edition of Modern English Teacher. It's called EFL Classroom and Global Issues by Mustafa Altan. In it, the author claims that the field of ELT has been criticized in the past for three reasons. First, lacking an interesting subject matter. After all, only a fraction of our learners enroll for English lessons because they're passionate about the language itself. Second, being somewhat disconnected from main educational ideas or what goes on in the world of teaching, not just teaching English. And finally, not bringing real life into the classroom. I remember that some of the materials that I used as an EFL learner were indeed a bit disconnected from reality. For example, they used to represent British people as white men who were passionate about gardening, frequently wear a top hat and carry an umbrella. Of course, that was a long time ago, and publishers and material writers have been making a big effort to ensure that the materials we use reflect a little bit more the reality we live in. So let's take a look at how to do that. Here are my 6 strategies to break down classroom walls and let the world in. 1. Understand learners' background and abilities. Things change very quickly nowadays, don't they? What we see as current, relevant and real suddenly becomes so last year. That's why it's important for us to gather information about our learners. Needs assessment questionnaires have been around for a long time. It's very common for teachers to hand out a questionnaire for students in order to try to learn a little bit more about their background, what their preferences are, and what they like and don't like doing in the English classroom. But in my experience, these formal questionnaires have limited applicability in real life and usually end up lost in a folder somewhere. They are a good start for sure, but I feel that it's the everyday interaction, lesson after lesson, that really helps us see the student, understand who they are and how we can help them. That's why I feel it's super important for us to create opportunities for students to talk about themselves and express their opinions freely. By asking students to do speaking activities in small groups more frequently, you're giving yourself the chance to listen to them closely, and a lot of precious information can come from that. 2. Use authentic materials. Materials developed for classroom use, like course books, are fantastic. They are organized, they usually follow sound pedagogy, and they're full of resources we can use. However, as they are made to cater for a large audience, they might not address the needs of your individual students. That's why supplementing your lessons with authentic materials can be very useful. By authentic material, I mean what Tricia Hedges described as materials which have not been designed specially for language learners and which therefore do not have contrived or simplified language. I feel that the best way to ensure that the authentic material is relevant to our learners is to allow them to choose them, allow them to choose the types of materials we're going to use in the classroom. If you want to use real articles, websites and videos, but you're not sure how to design the tasks to go with them, I wrote a post on while listening and while reading activities. You can find it in this address here. 3. Bring current issues and topics into the classroom. The things that are going on in the world, in our city, or even at work can be very engaging to students. And as teachers, we can exploit that. We're living in an age where things that happen on the other side of the globe frequently become part of our conversation, and that's great. On the flip side, we're also living in an age of misinformation, polarization, and heated arguments everywhere. Bringing the discussions that are happening around the world into the classroom can not only be engaging, but also useful to help our students, young or old, become better citizens. We can help our students develop the linguistic abilities that they need in order to communicate their ideas and beliefs in a way that's not aggressive or violent and actually invite others to a respectful debate. The Modern English Teacher article by Mustafa Altan that I mentioned before has some very useful ideas on how to bring global issues into the classroom. Chiu-Suan Chong has also published some interesting thoughts in the last November's edition of ET Professional in an article called Not Only But Also Social-Emotional Learning. In her own words, we can also make them aware of their own assumptions and biases and perhaps encourage them to be more inclusive as they learn to use English in this very diverse world. Make sure you check those articles in the ET Professional and Modern English Teacher websites. They're great. Speaking of global issues, the next topic on my list is especially important if we consider the changes that the world has faced in the last years. Develop reading and writing skills that are relevant in the current scenario. The way we communicate has changed tremendously. If we take into account text messages, social media posts, comments, etc., we communicate through reading and writing much more now than we did in the past. And not only that, but we are also communicating with people that we've never met, people who don't know us. This distance between us and our interlocutor makes it very easy for us to misunderstand each other, and we fail to recognize the person's sense of humor or the person's intention. On top of that, we're bombarded with information from many different sources. Many of them are trying to convince us of their point of view or trying to sell us something. In order to get our likes, our clicks, our views, and our votes, some people often state opinions as if they were facts. In this context, here are some reading and writing skills that are becoming increasingly important. When it comes to reading, recognizing implicit meaning in short messages, understanding headlines, recognizing clickbaits and possible scams, distinguishing facts from opinions, identifying bias in the author's voice, recognizing incendiary language, fact-checking using different sources. Now, when we're talking about writing, these are some of the skills that I consider relevant nowadays. Conveying meaning in very short texts, using emojis, GIFs, and stickers appropriately, typing using predictive text, communicating idea in a non-violent or aggressive tone, and inviting others to give their opinion in a non-threatening way. This list is not final, so let us know in the comments what skills related to reading and writing you consider useful in our current times. Number 5, ask students to do things they will actually do in the real world. In his book Teaching by Principles, H.D. Brown reminds us of something that as teachers we sometimes forget. He says, "Someday your students will no longer be in your classroom. Make sure you're preparing them to be independent learners and manipulators of language out there." For quite some time now, ELT materials and teachers have been trying to make tasks more relevant and closer to what students do in real life. Role-play activities are a classic example, as are writing CVs and cover letters. We can take this one step further by asking students to actually do the things that they will need to do on their own in the future. Common apps and websites that students already use can be great for that. For example, instead of simply having a theoretical discussion on where to go on your next holiday, you can ask students to research flights and accommodation in websites like Trivago, Skyscanner, and Kayak, and then present to the rest of the group their conclusions on where to go and how much that will cost. You can also ask students to use their mobile to find presents for people on Amazon or eBay, read descriptions of apartments to rent, compare post-graduation courses from different universities, or even create their own viral TikTok video. The sky's the limit when it comes to designing meaningful real-life tasks. Talk to your students, understand what they want to be able to do in real life, and ask them to do it. Finally, number 6, expose students to different varieties of English. It's very hard to come up with accurate data on how many people speak English and how. Reports vary tremendously, but even though these estimates may not be 100% accurate, they are very useful to help us understand a little bit of the trends. Let's look at a relatively conservative estimate by ethnologue.com. According to them, the number of people who speak English is around 1.1 billion. From those, 378 million are considered native speakers of the English language. And what does it mean? Well, it means that around 2/3 of the English speakers in the world don't have English as their first language, but as the second, third, or fourth. In fact, the same source says that only about 4% of communication in English happens exclusively with native speakers involved. Consequently, if you're only providing your learners with language models of people who are native speakers of English, you're not really preparing them for the real world. Even people whose first language is English do not all speak the same way. They're not a uniform mass, but different individuals who have their own way of speaking. A lot of materials that aim at teaching British English, for example, contain mostly what we call RP, or received pronunciation. But recent studies show that only 2% of the British population actually talk that way. So if you really want to help your students operate in the real world, make sure you expose them to a wide range of varieties of English and accents, both native and non-native. I hope you find these tips useful for your lessons, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about them. So make sure you leave a comment below or contact me on all social media at WhatisELT. Don't forget to subscribe to Pavilion ELT YouTube channel and hit the notification bell to receive all the latest updates. And also, consider subscribing to Pavilion ELT magazines, ET Professional and Modern English Teacher. There, you find 10 years worth of research, lesson ideas, techniques and articles, just like the ones that inspired this video. See you next time!